My guest today is Linda Schaeffer, a 1973 graduate of the Stillman School of Business, one of the very first women to graduate from the school, and she did so in just 3.5 years. Linda shares with us how transformative her Seton Hall experience was, not only for her career, but also as a person who found their voice and uses it to inspire positive change even to today. Take a listen. Linda, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the Seton Hall Pirate's Eye podcast today.
Thank you, Bianca, and I am so excited to be here. I have never done a podcast before.
Well, welcome. And I am thrilled that I am the host that gets to inaugurate your podcast experience. And I really want to get into your Seton Hall story. There are so many directions that we can take with this. Amazing accomplishments in your professional career, but also in your Seton Hall journey. So let's start from the beginning. How is it that you decided to attend Seton Hall, and what was the journey to Seton Hall like for you?
Okay, the journey to Seton Hall was fairly simple. My parents really wanted me to go to a Catholic university. They actually wanted me to be a teacher or a nurse, okay? And they thought Seton Hall would be great. I had no desire to be a teacher or a nurse. I wanted to be an attorney. So I was attracted to Seton Hall because I thought if I got an accounting degree, they had, and I thought that was a great combination with a law degree. So I thought, gosh, they have a good accounting program. And then I'll go to law school, and they already have a law school, and it's local. So I was excited about Seton Hall for that very reason. The other thing that kind of attracted me is that I was going to be one of the first women to enter the Stillman School of Business. So,
Amazing.
and I always liked hanging around with guys. So to me, it was going to be like a natural fit.
I love it. Now, when you say local, you are originally from New Jersey. What town are you from?
I was from a little town called South River. Don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's, just a little bit south of New Brunswick, which is where Rutgers is.
Okay. Oh, so tell me, how did you decide Seton Hall versus Rutgers if Rutgers was kind of nearby?
Well, my parents really didn't want me to go to Rutgers, to be very honest. They thought it was a party school. And they just really wanted me to be in a Catholic university. You have to understand, I have 3 aunts that are nuns. I have an uncle that's a missionary priest. And so they were very, very Catholic.
Okay.
And they felt very strongly about me going to a Catholic university, and they agreed to pay for a good deal of it. So that's it. That's an easy, and I'll be very honest, my mother worked for a really long time to be able to afford to do that. So it was a pleasure not to walk away with student debt.
Oh, tell me about it. I love it. I love the commitment from the parents and the anchoring of the Catholic values. So tell me, you arrive at Seton Hall, you're starting your university career. What is the experience like for you throughout your time at Seton Hall as a Stillman School of Business, kind of early on, one of the first women to attend? What was the experience like? Was it what you imagined it would be, like a natural fit, or the opposite?
No, I was pretty comfortable with it, but I kind of found my voice at Seton Hall because I found out that you have to stand up for certain things. For example, we didn't have a women's dorm then. So I had to walk. I don't know if you remember where the VA hospital is,
Yes.
but we rented a house with 8 gals. So most of them were teaching and nursing students. There was one business student. She was the other person in the Stillman School of Business with us. So we rented a house, but we had to walk there, okay, because none of us had cars.
Right.
So, and that limited our nighttime classes because, quite frankly, that's not the best area of town to be walking into as a young woman. So that was a little bit of a shock, is to kind of plan your classes around, your hours and when it gets dark. So it was the first thing. I guess the other thing is that in Bailey Hall, which is where we had the classes before the Stillman School was built, they were in the process of building it, and they were in the process of building the dorms. But the Bailey Hall didn't have a designated women's room. Okay, so I was asked where the women's room was, and they told me that I had to go to the library, which was right across the way. Okay. And I was like, that's just not an acceptable answer. And so I went to the dean and talked to him and said, there's a problem. And the problem is that I was not going to get dressed and go to we had 10 minutes between classes and I didn't want to miss class. I mean, I really valued being in class. So I said, but I have a suggestion. If we can't do anything, I'm just going to use the men's room and I'll take a really good look on my way into my private stall. Okay, within a week, they designated a bathroom in Bailey Hall to be for women students. So that worked
Wow.
out. Yeah.
I love
So,
you sharing that story because I think, we need to know the history, right, of how we got to where we are. We need to understand the context of what university life was like for some of the women who were first coming into the scene at Seton Hall, right? And you're mentioning being one of the first women at the Stillman School of Business, and it's we're a little far. Like, it's hard for us to really conceptualize that. It's a little different from, for example,
mhm.
my experience. I graduated in 2010. So I guess the question here is, you talk about finding your voice, and where did that confidence come from, or where did that empowerment come from, that you said, you know what,
Okay.
there is an issue and I need to do something, and I need to make a change for not only my present situation, but for the future generations that also are going to come into
Mhm.
Seton Hall.
Well, my voice really came from my mom because my mother was a bookkeeper and she worked to send us to school, to be very honest, and she worked pretty hard. But when I was younger, I wore glasses that were really thick, okay, and I was a little bit cross-eyed and I had curly frizzy hair and I was called I would have a Polish background, so you can imagine what I was called. And so I would come home from school crying and, saying I was called this. And my mother said, well, we can't do anything about you being Polish, but what you can do is do something about the dumb part and show them they're wrong. Okay.
Mm,
So she was the first one who basically said to me, don't come home crying, do something about it, do good grades. And that's basically where I got my voice. Okay. She was the one who didn't coddle me. Okay. And said, oh, you poor little thing, and let me go fight it for you. No, she basically said, you've got to fix it. Okay. So that's what I did. And to be honest, I went to my 40th high school reunion and I just shone. I mean, it was just like, all the people who called me that, they probably didn't remember it, but I just was like, okay, I've got this. Okay, so that's where I got my voice. But I think it was also John Dean, who was really my mentor. He was such a phenomenal professor and man. He encouraged me to always come in. If you have a complaint, come in with kindness and come in with a solution. And I tried to do that throughout my career when I had my own
mm.
office or I had my own staff. Do it with kindness, not with threats, not with, rioting or doing anything like do it with kindness, but with a solution. And so
That's
John
beautiful.
Dean really encouraged me and gave me the strength to find my voice and to just voice myself, which I still do. Okay. To be very honest. So,
I love that, Linda. And especially as a graduate of Seton Hall, as a woman graduate of Seton Hall, to
mhm,
understand the route that it took, or the journey that it took for the generations before me to pave the way, is really something that I
mhm.
appreciate. So, gratitude to you and to your mom for establishing yourselves in that way with confidence, in order to say something's got to change in order for generations later to have a better experience. So, thank you for that. So let's take it back. You're at
Okay.
Seton Hall, you're recognizing these things that need to change, you're coming up with solutions, and all the while you're studying your coursework. And I understand that you shared with me when we first spoke about you coming on the show that you had to work while you were in university. And so I imagine that your time was very limited. So tell me a little bit about how you balance both of those things.
Yeah, my time was limited. I first of all, I decided to graduate in 3.5 years as opposed to 4 years, and it was basically a financial consideration. I knew my parents really saved hard to pay for my education, but they paid for my room, board, and tuition. Okay, everything else was basically on me. So if I wanted clothes or books or anything like that, I had to pay for that. So that's I don't know. So that was the first thing is I was on a limited budget, okay, and I just decided that I had to kind of do everything. I did not participate in a lot of clubs or activities or that type of thing because most of them for women were kind of with the nursing or education department. So there
Okay.
wasn't a lot for business. I did become friendly with one of the fraternities, okay, that I sat at their table quite often and became a little bit of their sweetheart. And that was kind of fun because once again, I was hanging with the guys, okay.
Yeah.
But that was really a fun time. So, you know, I just let one day happen after another and just try to cram everything in. I knew how much I had to study. I knew I had to make class because I didn't have time to just redo something on my own. I had to take good notes. So that's basically what I did is I just tried to balance my time and it just worked because taking 21 credits in a semester and accounting, which is a lot of homework, is it wasn't easy,
Right.
but I also have a lot of energy, and even though I'm old now, I still have a lot of energy.
I love that. Now, so for a lot of the folks that I speak with on the podcast, they talk about their clubs, the organizations, the kind of extracurricular activities that really were part of transforming their Seton Hall experience. And I know, as you just mentioned, right, you were working, you didn't have a lot of time for that. There weren't so many options for that to begin with.
No,
But
there weren't.
what was the transformative experience for you in Seton Hall by way of coursework or internship, or what in place of organizations or extracurriculars, what really stood out for you and shaped your experience?
The thing that shaped me the most was between my freshman and my sophomore year, okay, and my sophomore and junior year. Um, Seton Hall selected me to get an internship with the Internal Revenue Service. And that was really an honor. There were only two students in Seton Hall that got selected. One was a guy
Wow.
and one was myself. Okay.
Wow.
And so what we did is when we finished our freshman year, we actually went to the training that college graduates went to at the IRS. My first training was in Richmond. That was my first year. My second training was in Philadelphia. So I spent this summer doing the training in Richmond and in Philadelphia, kind of on the government's dime because they were also paying me.
Right.
What I had to do in return was I had to work 1 day a week at the Internal Revenue Service, and then any time off, I had to work, okay, as a revenue agent. And what they did, and they did this with, it was a pilot program, and they did it with 10 students from around the country. And what they did is they compared our results to the people they were hiring. So, like, we had to have really good grades to get into the program, and we had to be recommended by the Dean of Business. So I did that, and that was a thing that absolutely I loved doing, and it totally changed the trajectory of my career later on because I learned how to do forensic accounting. And forensic accounting is really like digging and trying to find the dead bodies or how the dead bodies died.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I mean, it's looking at the books and seeing what's real and what's not real.
Right.
Um, and the Irish training was so spectacular that it was, and then my experience in the field taught me how to deal with people, how to deal with businesses, how to ask questions, how not to be afraid because you had to go in strong as an IRS agent. So that's where I spent almost all my time is I just had to I had to work, and then all summer I had to work, and Christmas break I had to work, and that type of thing. So it didn't leave a lot of time, especially with taking a heavy course load. So that's what I did, and that was the most transformative thing that has happened to me at Seton Hall. And
You mentioned that had that had a lot to do with the your career trajectory. So let's talk about that a little bit. You sped through your classes at Seton Hall. You graduated in 3.5 years. Quite the accomplishment. Incredibly challenging. And you had this IRS experience. You graduate, and what happens to Linda?
okay,
Where do you go? Where do you start? Do you end up at law school like you originally anticipated? What does your life start to look like post graduation?
well, what happened after that is the IRS did offer me a very nice position, about 2 grade levels over what everybody else was starting at. But I really didn't want to be at the IRS. I just was more energetic, more work driven, and that type of thing. So I had gotten interviews with all the big 8 accounting firms then, and that was great because I got all these free dinners. Okay, because they wanted to dine me a little bit. And I decided to go with Haskins and Sells, which is now Deloitte Touche. Okay.
Okay.
And I went into their audit department because I thought if I got a little bit of audit experience, then I could, and I saved a little bit of money, I could then go to law school, because that's, I did not want to go to law school with having to have a big bill. So I
Mhm.
wanted to save money. But I
Mhm.
started to find out that I kind of enjoyed what I was doing, and I kind of got used to a really good paycheck. So it's hard to go back to school once you've been out. In
Fair
fact, I
enough.
tell my son, our son who graduated from Bucknell, I said to him, go to graduate school now. And he did. I said, because once you go to work, you don't want to go back to school.
Right.
So I never went to law school. I stayed at Haskins and Sells for a few years, and then I had gotten married. My husband was working in New Brunswick, so I took a more local job at Laventhal and Horwath at that point. So I stayed with them. I was a tax accountant by then. Okay, I really did nothing but tax. And I stayed with Laventhal and Horwath, and then I got pregnant, and that was not a good thing. I was told I would not be a partner. Okay. Oh, because I was having a baby and I wouldn't be able to work as much. Okay. We had no maternity leave.
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
Okay, so I left the firm and I started my own practice. A number of clients came with me. I was told that I was in violation of a covenant not to compete with, which, by the way, they never asked me to sign one. I told them if I signed one, I would have remembered it. You show me where I signed it. So I took some clients with me and I started my own practice.
Good
And
for
I had
you.
my baby, and I worked out of my house for a year. Until my son, who was toddling, decided to rearrange my file cabinet by going woo and throwing files all over the place.
As toddlers will do. Yes.
So, so after that, I decided to rent some space with another guy to start an accounting practice there, and get some help at home. And so I stayed with him for about a year, and we decided to become partners. But at the partnership meeting with the attorney, we were talking about the terms of compensation. And he said in the middle of the meeting with the attorney there, I just always need to know I always have to make more money than Linda. And I said, what? I looked at the attorney and I said, please send me the bill. This meeting is done. I terminated. I moved out of the office and moved into my own office. Okay. Because I was not, when I say I found my voice, I absolutely found my voice. And to
Yes.
this day, my husband, if he were here, would tell you I have found my voice. But that was, that was in the early 80s. Things were different,
Yeah.
really different.
Yeah.
So I had my own practice, and then I kind of finally I got asked to become a partner with another firm, a very reputable firm in New Jersey. And I did that for a period of time. And there was a little conflict with one of the managers who kind of did a little blackballing behind my back.
Hmm.
So I left them, went into another practice with one of the women, and stayed there. Then I finally merged that practice into Witham Smith and Brown, which is a pretty well-known firm in New Jersey. and I started their litigation practice there. So, or not started it, but headed it up for the Princeton office.
Nice.
So,
Linda, what I'm loving about this story is the consistency and that common thread of your Seton Hall experience, just as you said, when you found your voice and you were recognizing that there were some inequities and addressing them. And
mhm.
that continued to resonate to be true throughout your career. And I really just appreciate you uplifting that part of your story because, again, the contextualization of understanding what it was to go to school, graduate in 3.5 years, go into the world of accounting, try to create your own, your own firm, your own company, your own business, look for partnership, and then to keep running into these types of things and addressing it along the way. I think sometimes for some folks, they'll find their voice in college and it's a moment. But it sounds
Mhm.
like for you, it was something that stood with you throughout the course of your career and your life.
It did, and it really I have so much to thank Seton Hall for that. Okay,
Yeah.
and I think one of the transformative things is I was a tax accountant, and because of my IRS experience, when I started my own practice, I moved into a woman into a building that a woman attorney who was a family law attorney and I became friends. And she had a case that she wanted me to get involved with. Because of my IRS experience, because I had no intention, she said, I really want you on this case. And I said, I don't want to do that type of work. Then I was a tax accountant and that's what I
Right.
was doing. And that's what I was excelling at.
Right.
But I decided to take it, and she told me I would never go on the witness stand and that type of thing. And it turned out to be a huge case. We were called the Three Musketeers because we were representing a woman. I was the accountant. Okay, forensic accounting was not heard of then. And she was a female. And the guys were fairly high powered. They called us Three Musketeers. And we beat them so badly because we found a second set of books. We found a mistress, another home. He had a double life. Um, he even denied, because we have to show in evidence that we have the second set of books. He denied that he wrote them, and we had a handwriting expert. So
Fascinating.
we just, and that started my career in forensic accounting, because then it was kind of the Three Musketeers became fairly well known. So
So you continue to do that work.
I continue to do that work, and in fact, I still do family mediations. Okay,
Okay.
so even though I have graduated 51 years ago, I retired once in New Jersey and then once in Atlanta, and from a firm, and now I'm doing family law mediation. Okay, which is very
Wow.
time, but it's the same type of work,
Yeah.
and I love it.
Wow. So did you end up as an expert witness on the stand?
Oh yes, since since 1984. And many times after that, many times after that. So, and now I just found out, because being on the DAG, on the Dean's Advisory Council, that they are starting a forensic accounting specialty, okay, or part of the accounting degree, which I'm very excited about because it's so important.
Wow.
Yeah,
Now, you started to allude to this. You graduated, I think you mentioned just 51 years ago.
51 years ago. Yeah.
I love it. I love
December
it.
will be 52 years ago.
Beautiful. Congratulations. And I love the journey. I love the story. And now we are fast forwarding and we're looking at what has your relationship been like with Seton Hall after graduation, right? So you have this phenomenal career. It's taking you in directions that you didn't imagine.
Mhm,
And we're talking right now. We're on the podcast. You're so excited about this forensics accounting degree that's happening at Seton Hall.
mhm.
And you recently have kind of reinvigorated that relationship. What has the relationship with the university been like for you throughout these years?
For many years, I didn't have a relationship at all with Seton Hall. I always gave them some amount of money, okay, just because I always feel like you give back.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a huge amount, but I always stayed on the roster. When I was in New Jersey, quite frankly, with raising a son, and my husband traveled a lot, and having a career and being really involved with New Jersey State Society of CPAs, I was just so busy that I didn't really have time to get back to Seton Hall on a regular basis. But when I moved to Atlanta, which was 20 years ago, Seton Hall kind of has somebody that comes down to the area and meets with some of the alumni. And it was a woman who we became a little bit of, friends. And she was very kind. She would always call me for lunch or dinner that she was here, and we would just talk. And at the just before she left for another university, she said to me, we're considering doing a dean's advisory council. Would you consider being on it? And I thought, sure, I think I would be. So I was invited onto the council. Okay, and I went to my first council meeting, and quite frankly, I was excited about what's happening at Seton Hall.
Yeah.
There's some really interesting programs. I think Dean Strausser is unbelievable. Um, and
Absolutely.
I just got really excited about it. So it's just been wonderful what they're doing. They are differentiating themselves from so many accounting schools. So many accounting schools do one thing: they prepare you for the CPA exam. And one thing I will tell you, it took me a couple times to pass the CPA exam.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Seton Hall didn't do a great job in preparing me for that because they spent much more time on communications, business ethics,
Mm-hmm.
those types of things, as opposed to, fund accounting, which you're never going to do unless you're doing municipal accounting. I mean, it's just, they concentrated on really important aspects.
Got it.
And what I got excited about was they really are working with that on a continuing basis now. I mean, they are really emphasizing, how do you network? From basics, they have these courses, Business 1000 to 4000 for each year of a business student. That is a phenomenal model. So I'm very excited about the school right now, and so excited that my husband and I decided to set up an endowment fund
Beautiful.
for experiential learning. So that would give people that can't afford it the opportunity to go abroad, to have an internship that's maybe unpaid but can be funded, those types of things.
Yeah.
And I am very excited about that.
Why do you think that real world experience while studying is so important?
Oh, it is. I mean, I can remember a time our son came to us and said, he was at Bucknell, and he said, I just want to go and work down the shore and flip burgers and that type of thing. And we're like, no, okay, that's not going to help you in your field. You're going to be a civil engineer. What's going to help you? So he worked for an architectural firm. He worked for a construction company. I mean, he worked for Bechtel Engineering. He had really good experience. So when he got out of school and he wanted to go to graduate school, they didn't require that he would have a year of, experience in the field before being accepted into grad school. And he
Right.
has turned to be incredibly successful in the construction field.
Oh, nice.
And so if it had not been for that internship and I was flipping burgers someplace or waitressing someplace, I wouldn't have learned anything
Mm.
but
Mhm.
to learn. And so the more that people can get experience while they're in college will mean so much to their resume.
Yeah.
Plus, they'll follow their passion a little bit more when they're not being forced to have to pay bills. Okay, so
Yeah.
my passion was like the discovery, the legal aspect of being an IRS agent, those types of things. But that's where my passion was.
Right.
And then circumstances, God always puts you in a place where you need to be. And the fact that I met this woman attorney, I still think it was guided by the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Right. No mistakes. I love that. And thank you so much for contributing to the Seton Hall community. It's a beautiful thing to hear that, for so many years you had a little bit of a distant relationship, and yet even though you were in Atlanta and you were distant from the university physically, there still was a way to cultivate a relationship
mhm,
later through this woman. And now you've set up an endowment fund so that students can have this really meaningful experience. And,
mhm,
when I think about that and I put it all together, it means that 20 years from now, we'll be talking to an alum who graduated, in
Hmm.
2026 and is talking about this really incredible internship or work experience that changed the
Hmm.
trajectory of their life, right? And so it's kind of, another level of the conversation that I'm having with you right now, where you had this
Hmm.
experience change the trajectory of your life. Fast forward, your fund is going to do that for so many other people. And when I think about how it all just is this symbiotic relationship, I think that's really phenomenal and fascinating, to know the impact that it's going to
Hmm.
have in the future.
I'm hoping so. I'm hoping so. I always say my best gift is to get a letter from somebody saying, if it weren't for this scholarship or whatever it is, or this opportunity, I wouldn't have done whatever.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that would be my biggest gift.
Yes. And it speaks to something that is so common or so consistent in the folks that I speak with from Seton Hall, the Seton Hall alumni who join the podcast, which is servant leadership. And I see that again in this story of creating this opportunity. And it is you being a leader and you being in service to the Seton Hall community. And it rings true for so many of the alumni, which is they're just anchored in this servant leadership. So I love to see that as well in all of the interviews that I have. And I think that that's, again, one of the places in which there's that common thread coming through in your story as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
It's just the time of our life right now is to return what Seton Hall has done for us.
Beautiful. And now it's been such a pleasure to learn from you. Do you have any last insights, key takeaways, words of wisdom for the folks of the Seton Hall community that are listening to this podcast today?
Yeah, a couple of things I think. First of all, if you have a family, love your child and spend time with your child. If I could give it all back, um, I would have probably spent more time with my child, to be very honest. Okay, so I guess it's only going to be grandchildren that I'm going to be hopefully able to spend time with and give them what I maybe didn't give my son sometimes. Okay,
Mm,
I think that's
mm-hmm.
really important. Your career is important, but your kids are more important. Um, and I think that if you do, this is so much my philosophy. If you do have a criticism or you feel alone in the world or that type of thing, um, the way to implement change is through kindness and suggestions and your own example. I think is very, very important. And I think the more we can be kind to each other, the better off our world will be. We have a very anxiety driven world,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And it's going to take each one of us a step at a time to make it better,
That's
okay?
right.
Um, I was a very I was a very unusual person at Seton Hall, but I used that to my benefit. Okay. I tried to implement change in many, many ways. Okay. Um, but and then, when you do start to get gray hair, it's time to give back. It's time to give back. Sometimes when you have a family, you don't have time or you don't have money to do it.
Yeah.
But when you get gray hair, it's time to be thinking about what can I do to give
Mm,
back to someone who gave me so much.
I love that. I love that, Linda. Thank you so much. Those gems are just some takeaways that I think everyone can benefit from. And I appreciate you taking the time to speak and for your service and your generosity to the Seton Hall community. I love to see it. And I hope that this just continues and we'll get to hear more from Linda in the future.
Thank you, Bianca.
Linda is one of more than 100,000 Seton Hall alumni who demonstrate what great minds can do with a Seton Hall education.